Well, thank you all for coming very much. Today and throughout this 50th year of the College of Liberal Arts, we're celebrating the past and even more the future of the liberal arts here at Purdue. Thanks for joining us for our first panel this afternoon, The Best College Major. And joining me to discuss the best college major and the timeless, essential, and relevant value of the liberal arts at Purdue are 5 of my colleagues from throughout the College of Liberal Arts. Starting to my far left is Will Gray from the Department of History. Then Wei Hong from the School of Languages and Cultures, also the director of the Confucius Institute here at Purdue. Dan Olson from the Department of Sociology. And Rayvon Fouché from American Studies, the director of American Studies and the Department of History. And Robyn Malo from the Department of English and the program in Medieval Studies. Now, these are 5 of my colleagues in the College of Liberal Arts, and we're talking about the best college major. But as a philosopher, I don't want you to draw the wrong inference. There was not a cage match to the death, eliminating other departments or programs. Other departments and programs are participating in the other panel. But we hope that this will give you a taste of some of the things going on in the College of Liberal Arts and some of the things that we're excited about celebrating with you here today. We want to talk a bit today about the success of liberal arts students in their careers and in their lives, and about the knowledge and the skills that they receive as part of their liberal arts education. So we're going to start off by talking a little bit, after we start the countdown timer, about the careers and service opportunities of our students and their successes. This year, CLA will be awarding about 1,000 bachelor's degrees and probably approximately 100 PhDs in various liberal arts fields. And over the past 50 years, I estimate tens of thousands at least of bachelor's degrees from liberal arts fields. And hundreds of thousands of Purdue alums have had the privilege and the advantage of studying the liberal arts here at Purdue. And these graduates have gone on to do wonderful things, as have graduates from liberal arts programs throughout the country. And they've been very successful. We know that nationally, liberal arts bachelor's degree holders earn about $1 million a year, $1 million more over their careers. I was like, whew, where is he getting those statistics, right? Than high school graduates do. And we know that though sometimes liberal arts graduates start out a little lower on the salary scale than those in other disciplines, within a few years, within 10 years at least, this salary gap has been covered. And by peak career earning years, estimates are that liberal arts graduates earn about $2,000 more a year on average than those from professional and pre-professional majors. So liberal arts graduates are successful in financial terms, but not only in financial terms. So I'd like to ask some of my colleagues to talk a bit about some of the things that graduates of Purdue Liberal Arts are doing post-graduation. Wei, could you tell us something about what graduates of languages and cultures have been doing?
Yes. I'm glad I'm the first person to speak to brag about my own language and culture, the School of Languages and Cultures. And we have just too many stories to tell, many wonderful stories. I may not know everybody's success, but I know the ones that I really did touch my life as well since I taught them. The first person I want to highlight is Christopher House. He is a Spanish major, and he studied Japanese and Chinese here at Purdue University. And his success includes he's just pursuing his study in China. And before China, he taught Japanese here as a volunteer in the International Center in West Lafayette, providing service of his skill. And he taught English in South Korea. And now he's studying for a year in China to continue his study in Chinese language and culture. When I met him this last December, he is just speaking fluently, but also he's appreciating the education that Purdue gave him. So I asked him, what's your plan for, after China? He said he's going to do master's in public services, in the United States, which I feel just great, that he's returning his education from Purdue to the rest of the world, And the second, I'm not only speaking pursuing master's degree, but also people who are inspiring to me, who are inspiring the people around them and who are inspiring to the society. One person I can think of right now is my student Chanetta. Chanetta is a comm major, and she studied Chinese with us, and she said she's giving this Chinese education to the people, to the children in Chicago where she grew up. She said to the children in my high school who could be seen as underprivileged, and she said I'm also giving my Purdue experiences of language learning to my siblings at home. And now the siblings at different ages, they say when they play in the backyard, they see a plane flying, they say Chanetta is there. They always think Chanetta is flying because she studies foreign languages. She goes all the places. She goes to UK to study, she goes to Brazil, and she goes to China. So she is a person who is a role model for the children who otherwise may not have thought of taking languages to go to study abroad. And another person, so this is an inspiring story, another person I want to brag, I want to highlight is my own student, computer science here and a Chinese minor. And he started at the high school, when he was visiting Purdue as a prospective student here in Purdue computer science. He and his mother came to see me, what's the possibilities of learning language? I said, we have so many language we teach here in the department, just pick one and go from there. So we encouraged him to take, so he took Spanish and Chinese. He went on with Chinese and did Masters of Computer Science in China. Now he's having a startup company in China. So a business career, a service career, and inspiring story that I can tell to many from our department.
Thank you, Wei. Robyn, can you tell us something about the success in career and life that we see in English graduates?
With great pleasure, and thank you all so much for being here at the end of a busy semester, and so many thanks to Pat for putting this together. You all have no idea how much work he did behind the scenes, but thank you very much. I want to emphasize, first of all, that studying English at universities is robust. In fact, the percentage of our majors has increased since 1970. In 1981, the number of students graduating with an undergraduate degree in English was 0.7 out of 100, which is still a big deal, though that number may sound small. As of now, it is 1.1 out of 100. And here I will simply say, #Nate Silver. I have more stats if you want them, because Nate Silver. There are many reasons for this robust nature of our program and many reasons that our English majors do well. For while many of us may have heard, this is something my students have said, that majoring in English results in a life of bleakness and hardship consisting largely of making French fries, as Aristotle pointed out in the Poetics, it is the poet who is the maker. Poion is Greek for to make, an observation that seems particularly apropos for Purdue. So with that in mind and Pat's question in mind, I'm going to go on to outline several careers that students in my department have gone on to thrive in, as well as cite some of the general careers that English majors find themselves in. You'll note it's very wide. Broad, I mean. So, most recently, a colleague of mine had a student work for several years at the Newberry Library as an archivist. The Newberry, as many of you I'm sure know, is a prestigious library in Chicago. This student then went on to take up an executive position at Procter & Gamble. Other examples include a student who is now a legal assistant at a nonprofit organization providing representation to asylum and refugee seekers. A third student recently secured a spot as an editorial assistant for the Office of Code Revision for the Indiana General Assembly. This same student won our Best Literature major a couple of years ago. These are only a few examples. All of these students cite their experience as English majors as key to both the careers they have pursued and their success in those careers, which, as you'll note, do not necessarily include teacher and writer. There's a lot that you can do. The Atlantic Monthly, in a recent essay published about a week and a half ago, reports that English majors took jobs in business, museums, publishing houses, consulting firms, politics, and law. I myself am a case study. I worked in both public radio and politics before going to graduate school. I, in fact, turned down jobs in public radio and politics in order to go to graduate school. So, in other words, there are lots of choices, and I think it's important that we emphasize that. Business leaders consistently say they would rather hire English majors than business majors. Full stop. That is a true fact story. The same would be true for students in my other colleagues' fields, I have no doubt. The idea being that expansive and yet rigorous, detail-oriented thinking prepares graduates to succeed in any job.
Thank you, Robyn. And there are more statistics we could pile on and more success stories we could tell you about students. A recent graduate, one of the first students I had the privilege to teach when I started here at Purdue, one of my first philosophy classes, recently finished a term as a clerk on the US Supreme Court and is becoming a leader in politics and in policy. Many success stories. The question about the liberal arts probably isn't whether liberal arts produces bold leaders, because we know it does, but the question is why that is. What do we do in the liberal arts that produces these bold leaders? And part of the answer, I think, is that we teach our students and we think along with our students quite broadly. So I want us to turn the discussion a little bit away from success in career terms to what it is to think broadly. What kinds of broad knowledge and deep understanding are we encouraging our students to encounter in their studies here? And to start off our discussion of that, I wanted to think through the lens of philosopher Michael Oakeshott, who says something interesting and I think true about students and higher education. And this is what Michael Oakeshott said. He said, students are not here, that is in college, merely to improve their minds or to learn to think in general. Such unspecified activities are as impossible as an orchestra that plays no music in particular. Learning is coming to understand and respond to some particular substantive expressions of thought and some particular inquiries, some particular investigations, and to encounter those as invitations to think and invitations to believe and invitations to do. And Oakeshott suggests that the particular perspectives and approaches and different objects of study in our fields are distinct voices, distinct languages that are part of a conversation. So I want us to think for a moment about the things and the ways that we study in our fields and how this contributes to human life. So Robyn, could you tell us something about students in literature and in medieval studies and what it is they learn and why it's valuable?
Absolutely. Going back to Horace. This is important. People reference this all the time and don't know it's Horace, right? Literature has been hailed as a medium that both delights and instructs. And this basic idea is repeated in multiple essays by philosophers, poets, and so on over the past 2,000 years. In fact, Sir Philip Sidney, a 16th century poet, in one of the most amusing essays I have ever or will ever read, I expect, finds philosophers pedantic, sorry, Pat, and historians, it's not me, it's Sidney, and historians caught up in details. It is boring to read a philosophic treatise on honoring your parents, says Sidney, but to read Virgil's account of Aeneas carrying his father out of a burning Troy, who does not want to be Aeneas? History, and again, says Sidney, right, is stuck with what happened. Poetry can envision what may be, or even what should be. In that sense, from Sidney's perspective, and here I'm getting more particularly to Pat's question, It is the very imaginative capacities of literature that make it important as a discipline. With respect to my own field, medieval studies, I would like to quote Stefan Collini, a literary scholar at Cambridge. Quote, "The main reason why anyone studies medieval literature is that it's intrinsically very interesting. It also happens to be part of the past of our society. And trying to imagine a society not interested in its own past would be rather like trying to imagine a person not having a memory," end quote, or I would add, an imagination. As my own discipline of medieval studies shows, literature is additionally critical in how it reveals assumptions that both converge with and differ from our own. For example, Mandeville's Travels, a 14th century travel narrative, presents the East as a place where the monstrous and the subhuman reside. Students have consistently responded to this text by saying that these imaginary monsters help them to understand our own global context better because it helps them to envision things that are different from or foreign to ourselves. On the flip side, some values in medieval literature differ radically from our own. Medieval literature consistently rails against ambition, identifying ambition as a form of pride and therefore as a sin. This kind of approach is surprising to students and I think hugely useful because all of us are embedded in a society that seems to care more about how much we earn than about how much we do. Medieval literature thus gives students a chance to see that what we value now is not intrinsically valuable. It's part and parcel of our own cultural moment.
Thank you. Thank you. I noticed that you took had some harsh words for philosophy and history,
Sydney.
And then gave some things back to history. So let's think a little bit about history. Historian Jill Lepore has said that history is hereditary only in this way. We, all of us, inherit everything. And then we choose what to cherish, what to disavow, and what to do next. Which is why it's worth trying to know where things come from. Now, there's another famous line about history. There's an old saying about those who forget history. I don't remember it, but it's good. That whole line is Stephen Colbert. That's the line I wanted to quote from Stephen Colbert. But more seriously, Will, as a professor of history, can you tell us something about what history students do, what they learn, what they come to know as a result of studying the past?
Well, I wanted to start out by saying, first of all, I'm so glad that there are people here in this room who are thinking ahead to what they might be studying one day, because this is a chance for us to kind of put on display a little bit what you might want to consider here at Purdue. And that helps me to focus my remarks, actually, thinking about what you guys might be wanting to choose. Now, I'm glad you started this off with that quote from Professor Lepore, because I think it's an interesting way of approaching the past. But there's one aspect of that I would differ with, and I feel like she's suggesting that we can sort of pick and choose the kinds of history that we want to remember. That happens on a social level, but I would say that history teaches students about the institutions that are there, whether they like them or not. Now, President Daniels of our university is often referring to the need to study tradition and also the value of understanding heritage. And that is, of course, hugely important. But one of the great things about history is that it teaches you to examine those institutions critically. So it asks you to say, what is the world around us? How did it get here? And can we do things differently? Now, that might sound very abstract if you're thinking about parliaments. But history majors learn to think about the institutions of their daily lives and say, why do we do things this way? Where do these practices come from? Could they be different? This is the kind of skill which students develop when they are students. Now, you might want to ask a little bit about other qualities that come forth from this. This is different than our discussion about skills, I think. What other kinds of qualities, though, can one develop as a history major? Humility, I think, is one of the most important. There is an awful lot of impatience sometimes in the world, people who want to sweep things away. This can be found in the history of the French Revolution as well. And history majors are encouraged, especially through the courses of my colleague Whitney Walton, to examine critically what happened during the French Revolution. People at that time wanted to write everything away, tear everything away, start with year zero. And the results spun out of control very quickly. So what history can do is help people to understand that change, when it comes, can happen gradually. How to remain rooted in values while understanding what can move us forward. In a similar way, history can teach perspective. It can teach one to be calm in a crisis. Famously, during the Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962, which is a moment when the world was on the brink of nuclear war, President John F. Kennedy had at his bedstand a book about the outbreak of World War I. And the story of that book was that World War I happened because leaders weren't paying attention. They weren't trying very hard to stop the worst from happening. They fed into a cycle that produced horrible, tremendous violence. And being aware of that history, President Kennedy understood that a crisis, even as grievous a crisis as Cuba hosting Soviet missiles, was something that could be addressed with long perspective, without invading the island of Cuba, but with a much more measured and calm response to this horrendous geopolitical struggle. So these are the kinds of things I think that students can get from history. I might finally point out that every major in the liberal arts promotes the encounter with diversity. But I can't imagine that could be more true of any major than history. History majors take courses about civilizations in the present and in the past, civilizations that are no longer with us, civilizations that are thriving. And this prepares you to have something to talk about with anyone that you might encounter. So a history major grounds you in the here and now. It makes you aware of what institutions preceded us. It makes us aware of what kinds of change we can hope for without leading us to throw away all that came behind in this search for a better world.
Thank you, Will. And those are serious historical issues and concerns we have. But we also know in 21st century America, there are a few things we love more than our sports and our technological toys. We spend so much time and money on them, it's easy to assume that we already know everything about them, or at least that we can quickly Google anything we'd want to know about them. But Ray, I know that you've done some important work helping us to get a different perspective on these things, sports and technology. So could you tell us a bit about what students in your fields, American Studies and Science and Technology Studies, learn about technology or about sports and why that's important?
Yeah, so I guess this is my moment to talk on behalf of American Studies. And I'll begin quoting, I guess I would say, much less erudite voices. I'll have a quote from South Park. This is a moment where the young boys are in China, I believe, or in Asia, in a dodgeball competition. And the quote is, what do you call a white American with a PhD in math and physics? And the punchline is, a stupid American. And this is a very biting piece of commentary because it's a statement about the lack of cultural knowledge of Americans about various different aspects of the world. And you know, I see a group of students from Columbia, and when we think about America and American studies and American culture, it's not just centered around the United States. The Americas are North America, Central America, and South America. That's a large span of the world. And in this context, I think it's really important to think about the circulation of what Americanness and American means. Oftentimes in a global context, so much of what we think about American being is so tied to the United States. But when we think about American studies, American culture, we want to understand the flows of economic commerce, identity, culture, politics through and across the borders. A lot of the borders that shape the United States are deeply rooted in historical conflicts, particularly the border to the south, is motivated by issues about land, politics, identity, and social and cultural crisis. So I guess that's my pitch for initially why we need to think about studying, why we need to study American studies. But I think it's even broader than that. we are on a campus where we hear so much about the grand challenges of energy, water, health. But I think some of the grand challenges we need to actually return to are some of the things we think about in the Declaration of Independence: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those are very deeply humanistically rooted ideas. And I think American studies and people who study America can have very potent and powerful things to speak on that. So, but returning to the question about technology and sport, right, in the context of the globe, so much of the things we consume are centered around these cultural experiences and cultural expressions, right? The World Cup's coming up in Brazil. We see this momentous effort to think about capitalizing on that. And when we think about technology in sport, the first thing that comes to mind is shoes. Nike has just released a whole series of, we'll call them football, soccer shoes for this new upcoming World Cup. But I think American studies gives you a perspective of understanding the relationships between our technological output, our cultural understanding, and our connections to each other's individuals. And I think American studies has a profound place and space to think about the connections between culture, identity, society, and its material output.
Thank you, Ray. Dan, I know you're a sociologist, and you study some similar phenomenon to the phenomenon that Ray was talking about. Can you tell us something from your disciplinary perspective about what the big driving questions are for students in sociology and the kinds of things that they discover as a result of studying sociology?
Yeah, thank you. I should say, first of all, after listening to these impassioned pitches for these different disciplines, I'm so excited I want to sign up for one of these, become an English major or a historian. And actually, I minored in history, and I enjoyed my English classes. So I actually did not like the title of this session, What's the Best Major? Because I think that's, excuse me, kind of a dumb question. And I think a more appropriate question, I mean, it depends on the person. What are they seeking? And I think that all the disciplines participate in contributing to a whole picture. And it depends on what kind of questions you want answered. What discipline would you turn to? So in response to your question is along the lines of, well, what does sociology offer? And I would say, to kind of oversimplify it a little bit, I would say sociology is one of those disciplines that contributes to writing a handbook for human experience or human life, and particularly with regard to human behavior. Sociology is aimed at trying to explain human behavior. And there are other disciplines that try to explain human behavior that are also good ones. Some of them are in the liberal arts, some of them used to be. Psychology, for example, and biology and medicine. If you want to understand your body and how that affects your life, biology and medicine is a really important area to understand why you sleep too much or not enough, or many other questions. How long you're going to live. Psychology could help you understand the behavior. Well, psychologists, as I understand it, focus more on understanding behavior where the explanations derive from within the individual. Psychology is particularly turning in recent years to neurobiology and to biology for its explanations, but also psychology looks to the past experiences of particular individuals. Sociology is different because what makes it different from some of these other disciplines, and something it shares with political science and economics and to some degree with history, is it looks for explanations of behavior that originate with the behavior of other people. And so how you behave and how the other people around you are behaving is not just because of their biology and their particular individual experiences that they bring to the situations. It's partly the setting in which they are, the behavior of the other people in the room or in their society, and the things that are happening around them. So let me just give you, and when I was first a sociologist, I got intrigued by these questions. As Americans especially, and maybe just as humans, we are prone to think of understanding our behavior from an individual point of view. Why does someone drink too much, for example? Well, maybe they're depressed. Maybe they're, well, research in psychology and biology suggests that some of it is genetically explained. Adopted children's alcoholism rates are more similar to their biological parents than their adoptive parents. So there's probably some biological linkage there. But there are other reasons too. How do you explain the fact that Norwegians consume about twice as much alcohol per person as Danes do? Their cultures are pretty similar in that part of the world. So the behavior of a particular person, how much alcohol they drink, is partly explained by their biology, partly by their home situation. But there are other kinds of variables that are, the behavior of others around them. How many stores? An economist could say, well, how many stores are there to buy alcohol? How much money do you have? But then there are cultural norms too, and social norms that affect these things. Are you scorned for drinking in public, or are people laugh along with you? Haha, that's really funny. So the behavior of other people affects your behavior. My own field is sociology of religion. So why is it that, a parallel example would be, why is it that Swedes, to use Scandinavia again, very few people attend church, a much lower percentage say that religion is important or believe in God than in the US? Now, my genetic heritage is totally from Sweden, so I don't think it could be explained just that way. I'm actually a church member, so to understand those sort of things, I can probably tell you more about religion than alcoholism, but one would have to look at other social variables, the behavior of others. And I'll just give one more example and then I'll be done. The point of all this is that these kinds of disciplines that help you understand behavior help give you a handbook for whatever you do, whether you're a business leader, whether you're a housewife, whether you're a truck driver, to start to think about why are people acting the way they do. If you're on a committee, let's say, it's a well-known fact that committees make riskier decisions than individuals make on their own. If you interview them before the decision, what would they do in a particular situation, they're much more conservative and less risky. But when you put those same people in a group, they make riskier decisions. Their behavior is influenced by other people around them. So you ought to become more aware of the forces that are affecting your behavior and the behavior of other people. So I think that's one reason why, if you don't become a sociologist professionally or a researcher, that studying sociology can help you understand your own life and your world around you.
Thank you. I certainly agree. One of the terrific things about any of our majors in the College of Liberal Arts is the Liberal Arts Core Program, where you're taking more than a dozen courses in a variety of disciplines, including some disciplines outside of our college, in math and science, for example, that allow you to appreciate a variety of perspectives, including these and many others. There are some other things we haven't gotten to yet in our college, however. Wei, I know that you began as a student in China studying the German language, and now you've been spending years with us here at Purdue studying Chinese and linguistics and directing the Confucius Institute. So could you tell us, based on your experience, what is it that studying languages and cultures, other languages and cultures, gives to students and future members of society?
Thank you, yes. I think myself, as Robyn, for the case study myself, my experiences here in the US, I started actually very nervously. With a Chinese background, studied German in China and German here in an English-speaking country here in the US. It was pretty complex and was a little bit frightening to me because I wasn't speaking English well at the time when I came to the US. So it was a nervous start. I had nightmares thinking that I have to take a course in English. And when the course was conducted in German, I felt completely comfortable. And I could speak as much as I can. So that makes the point to myself as well that I think when you have the ability, for example, here, a language, it just opened up your opportunity of communication. You can read more literature. I was able to read all the literature in German without any problems, but I had trouble reading in English at the beginning when I was here, and no trouble in English, in Chinese, of course. And I taught German here at Purdue. It was a very interesting start. Yeah, I came to the class, and I put on board. I spoke in German completely, and people in the back saying, "This is interesting." And I know it is interesting, yeah. So I emphasize this is German. I think that was 101, yeah, German 101, and I will be your instructor. And everything will be conducted in German. So I think my experience tells me that with a foreign language in mind as your ability, as a skill, not only you can study, of course you can study more in all possible disciplines, and it opens up your networking opportunities. Because if I speak a foreign language in Germany, I have no trouble. If I go to a Spanish-speaking country, I will be nervous because I don't speak. So that will make me, I want to learn about it. So this is an actual tool for you to understand the rest of the world. I have a student who did Chinese minor here at Purdue, and he decided to use his skill in China to serve in the Chinese orphanage and teaching English there, and his wife followed, and all the children. Yeah, one of the kids was born in China. They made, and when he comes to me, yeah, Christopher, when he comes to me, he said, I am returning back to China. I know that he's learning all those skills. He thinks that now I'm serving China with my skills here. So the qualities are endless if you learn a foreign language, whether it's classical languages here that we offer Latin and Greek and the Italian, all the 12 languages we teach. They gave you endless possibilities of any possibility. Think about a situation that you want to talk to increase your, I call it capital of communication, because you have things to talk about if you know a foreign language, or at least if you know the culture, the person you're talking to. So I think I feel appreciated that I was able to study German here and to teach Chinese here in an English-speaking country. Thank you.
Thank you. We have really a wonderful symphony of different instruments with expert instrumentalists in the College of Liberal Arts. And I'd like to put in a little plug for the work of my colleagues as well in philosophy. In philosophy, a bit different than in some of the other fields maybe, we study, but also study along with some people who haven't been around for a while and some people who are still around today, starting with people like Plato or Confucius or Avicenna or David Hume, and more recently, people like David Chalmers or Elizabeth Anscombe, who think long and hard about some of the fundamental questions that undergird a variety of disciplines. One of my teachers, Alistair McIntyre, said this: "The warring partisans on the great issues that engage our culture and our politics all presuppose, even when they do not recognize it, the truth of some philosophical theses and the falsity of others. If we're to evaluate their claims, we had better know something about philosophy." And one of the things that we do in philosophy is try to grapple with some of those questions, unearth some of the assumptions, and take in and interact with the expertise of some of our colleagues in other departments to come up with better answers and better ways of going forward together as a society. There's a lot to learn and lots of ways to grow in the liberal arts. And that's part of what it is to think broadly in order to lead boldly, as we say. But in addition to all of this content and all of this abstraction that as a philosopher I really love, there are lots of concrete skills that our students pick up along the way that enable them to continue thinking broadly and leading boldly in the years after they graduate. Will, could you tell us a little bit more about what historians actually do and how they develop skills that are useful to them over the course of their life?
Sure, Pat. And here I guess I should give a nod to Robyn for her comment before about historians in detail. There's something to that. And, you know, I think that sometimes when parents hear that their students are going to spend all semester writing a research paper on the Soviet Union and the origins of the 1967 war, the parents might be saying, well, what possible use is that? Those of us who teach history love to guide students through original research projects. It's really fascinating to see students start with a question and then follow it through, and by the end of the semester they produce something far longer than they ever imagined could come forth from their word processors. I've been thinking a little bit about what actual skills come into play when students sit down and try and work through a long research paper. And now I should point out that this doesn't happen in every single history course. One of the advantages of being a history major is that you develop these skills over time. So one of the issues which I think is worth calling attention to is, first of all, weighing different authorities. A few years ago, I had a student come into my office and tell me about this assignment. I had asked the students to investigate the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979. And I said, look, here are these English translations of Russian Politburo, that's the top political office, decision-making body in the Soviet Union, their decision-making surrounding the invasion of Afghanistan. And many students responded to this assignment by saying, oh, yeah, of course, I really want to know what the Soviets had to say. Well, this student came into my office and said, well, I don't really need to look at those sources because, you see, my uncle told me what this was all about. It was because the Soviets wanted a warm water port. And, you know, I encouraged the student to look at a map and say, look at Afghanistan. Do you see a port? But after that, you know, I persuaded the student to take a few weeks and look through these sources. And he came back to me and said, oh, my goodness, Dr. Gray, things look a lot differently when you look at it from the internal perspective of what the Soviets thought they were trying to achieve. They didn't say anything about a port. So to me, that's in a microcosm what history can teach you to do. It can teach you to think about, now this, in other contexts, I'm sure that it is very relevant to listen to your relatives when it comes to making decisions. But when it comes to trying to understand historical events, looking at original sources can be perhaps a more relevant authority. And that's one example of a skill which one builds during doing a research paper. Following up from that briefly, students learn persistence when they're doing research papers. Students learn that the answers aren't all Googleable. You sometimes have to go and dig into the library. And what they find actually incites further curiosity. This is what drives students. Students at the beginning of the semester don't have any idea why they would be undertaking this project. Will come away sometimes thinking, wow, I can't get enough of this. Now, one final thing I will mention has to do with the crafting of these papers. Now, we like to talk a lot in the liberal arts about problem solving. And in January, there's a big festival celebrating liberal arts where we unveiled this new slogan. And they showed us a video then that talked about how liberal arts were problem solvers. Now, you might look at a history paper and think, how is a 25-page paper about problem solving? Well, it is. It's about working through logic. It's about taking an argument that you're trying to make and understanding the nuances. You never really can outline a research paper fully. A research paper is something that evolves as you understand the problem more deeply. And although philosophers may think abstractly, I think most historians only really begin to grasp what's going on a paragraph-by-paragraph basis. And so what students learn to do is figure out, how does this piece of evidence relate to the argument that I'm trying to make? What about this piece of evidence, which doesn't seem to fit in with what I'm trying to say? How do I take account of it? And how do I choose which details are relevant? There's so much I could possibly say. So by the end of a semester writing a research paper, students have learned far more than what they've actually set down on paper. They've learned to craft their ideas and shape them into a form that, you know, whether their parents want to read it or not, will actually prepare them to apply similar kinds of skills down the road in their workplace.
Thank you, Will. Dan, I know that sociologists have tools and methods that they use to address sociological questions. Could you briefly, we're running short on time, briefly tell us a bit about the skills and tools that sociologists have and how they're useful?
Okay, so while there's a lot of courses you could take in sociology that would help you deal with, you know, particular issues you face, maybe in encountering people from diverse backgrounds and so on, and as I explained later, it could help you as sort of as kind of like an owner's manual for your society, for yourself. I think that there are particular concrete skills that sociology students learn. Some of them aren't interested in these skills at first, but they are potentially very valuable. I'm thinking of a class I just came from, and I see one of my students from that class is statistics. And one of the important skills that sociologists learn is statistics and also research methods. Most of the stuff we know about the social world is known through methods of research that you could learn in research methods classes. We cannot study whole societies. You know, there's over 300 million people in the US. You can't meet them all and interview them all. How is it possible to study only 1,500 of them and have an idea of who the electorate's going to vote for? And how do you do that properly? If you do it improperly, you're going to get really bad answers. People who learn methods and statistics in sociology, maybe not just with an undergraduate degree, but with a little bit more training, maybe at a master's level, can get jobs working for companies, nonprofits, for marketing firms and things like that to help people know how to do research to find out answers to the questions that they need to know. It's kind of an arcane, mysterious thing to many people, statistics. Once you understand the basics of it, it opens up some possibilities for career choices. There's a more practical kind of thing, though, too, and I remember you want me to hurry, so I'll keep this short, is that if you learn research methods and statistics, even if you never do that in your job, you are reading other people's reports of, well, Americans are more this way. Some study said, you know, that Americans are now less intelligent than they were 30 years ago. Well, you ought to be a critical reader of that. How did they come to that conclusion? What research methods did they use? What was their sample? What was their sample size? What kind of statistics did they use? At least you should be able to know what kinds of questions to ask before you just believe everything you hear and read. Although maybe hearing and Googling is more than reading newspapers these days. But I think it makes you into a critical consumer of information about society as well.
Thank you, Dan. Ray, I know that you work in interdisciplinary fields, which by definition we assume don't share in common any one particular method or skill, but draw on a variety of them and develop skills that connect them up. Can you say something about the skills that interdisciplinary students need and pick up and how those are useful?
I think the interdisciplinary skills are tremendously important. And I think at this moment in time, a lot of the questions we're asking about the world can't be addressed by one specific disciplinary space. So I'll give an example. I have worked with a student who's actually now a journalist, and he was working on a series of projects on particularly hip-hop and how did hip-hop get to Japan. And it seems like a very simple, straightforward question, but when you start digging into it, you start realizing that, well, the story is that hip-hop is created in New York City through this interesting combination of African-American people, but it's much messier than that. Because when you look at the technologies that create and produce hip-hop, they're all designed and manufactured in Japan and Asia. So does that make hip-hop Japanese or Asian? Perhaps. But so what does it mean to think about this cultural experience as it moves from one place to another? And how do material artifacts, cultural expression, identity, cultural knowledge influence and shape these collective interactions and relationships? So we live in this moment where it's more important, it's so deeply important to understand how different communities engage each other and how you can interpret and analyze the tensions and the relationships and interactions between various different cultural environments and cultural communities to be very thoughtful about how to speak across large geographical and cultural barriers as we live in a world that's becoming increasingly smaller and smaller. So we're getting to a point where these historical traditions of geographical boundaries no longer hold. We live in a world where the internet is driving multiple different connections and collaborations. So how do we think differently about the world in which we live? And we need to have a set of tools and skills and abilities to be able to interpret these different ways in which we interact with each other on the planet.
Thank you. And Wei, I'm sure that you have something to add to that discussion about the range of tools we need in the 21st century world. So from the perspective of languages and cultures, what can you tell us about the skills we acquire and learn from studying your fields?
In School of Language and Cultures, we provide a full curriculum that includes literature, culture, translation, service learning, in particular languages, and all different sorts of courses that will develop our students to appreciate the world, but also having the skill set to be competent and also to be sensitive to what's going on around them. I'm thinking one example of Google Translate. Now you think, hey, let's put a German sentence and it comes out with English, yeah, and vice versa. And I tried it several times. It does not work. I tried many, many times. I said, let me try this. But so technology does not help us or facilitate what human interactions really, really need. Yeah, we need to look into the culture, look into the pragmatics, how language is expressed in a way that, that we should be able to understand. So machine does not work 100%. So in our department, in our school, we offer those opportunities to study, to be fully competent. And I also want to mention, we also teach food, cuisine, the cultural course, yeah, in French cuisine, in Chinese cuisine. So you think, I can make this dish, I can make that dish, I know what mapo tofu is in Chinese, but then we want our students to know more about it, to know about the history, the cultural values, the things or the philosophy behind what a dish particular is, what the dish is superficially understood. So that's what we offer. So we would like to develop our students to appreciate the cultures.
Thank you. And Robyn, can you tell us something about the English department and the skills that your students and alumni pick up by their study of English language and literature?
So I hope in my earlier answer I indicated the many ways in which English majors develop useful skills to take risks, to think quickly, to analyze closely, to challenge assumptions, to write clearly and argue well, to recognize our indebtedness to cultures and literatures of the past, and the less sung but equally important attribute, the ability to recognize beauty. However, and my colleagues have suggested this in their emphasis on understanding, the idea of skills is important, but as Stefan Collini says, it should not be the social good of literary studies, that is, should not be reduced to merely an economic good. So I want to leave us with a question, and that is, why is it only important to make a lot of money? This is a basic thing I think many of us would agree on, right? So skills are crucial, but the recognition of beauty in its many forms, the ability to reflect deeply on the meaning of life and on what constitutes beauty in the first place are surely more than just skills. All of our disciplines have utility, but I would challenge us all to think beyond that.
Thank you. In philosophy, we work on a set of skills, too, that I think complement the skills that my colleagues have talked about. One of our recent graduates who's finishing up at Yale Law School said this to me in an email recently. She said, 3 things philosophy teaches you to do are very useful and important. To think through different frameworks and to understand different perspectives and starting points from which to view the world, to reason tightly and to construct logical arguments and to write eloquently and persuasively. She says these are the things that she uses every day in law school and in her summer law school internship experiences. And these are the skills, along with the skills she learned in other courses, that help her to make decisions about what she's going to do next in her career. A question that she and many others will be asking on a regular basis: what to do with their time, what to do with their career, what to do in their communities. And so there's a richness in the liberal arts. There's much to celebrate about what we've been doing over the past 50 years, before any of us began at Purdue. And there's even more to celebrate about what's coming in the next few years, the next decades, about the liberal arts at Purdue. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to my colleagues. And after a short break, there'll be another panel next door. Thank you all for coming.